Good evening and welcome to our live webinar on dry cow management. Today, it's June 17th, and whether you're joining us from the clinic, your car, or the kitchen table, we're thrilled to have you. Tonight's session is for veterinarian, but we welcome all animal health advisors, nutritionists, and everyone involved in navigating the cow from lactation to calving. Transition period. And here's the real question: is this a rest or a reset period, a powering up moment for the next lactation? And to explore this, we are joined by two leading minds. On my right, Professor Alex Bach, the Professor University of Leiden, and on his right side, Dr. Leonard Theron, the Chief Technical Officer of Ackaert. My name is Geoff Ackaert. I'm Technical Director and Global Head of Ruminants at AHV, and happy to be your host this evening. A few quick notes. The chat is open, so please leave all your questions and remarks in that place. Happy to address it. There will also be live pop-ups during this presentation. Please fill them in. They will shape our discussion of this evening. We'll close the session with a 10-minute Q&A to answer your most pressing questions. The objective of this evening is, of course, to define the ideal dry cow management system based on science and experience. And, of course, we want to introduce StopLac, an oral feed additive that is truly the first dry-off facilitator to improve management, udder health, animal welfare, and a positive impact on metabolic health, as being displayed this evening for you tonight. And we'll ask ourselves, can this science change tradition? Is abrupt dry-off truly abrupt? And is stress-free actually possible? We'll discover it tonight, but first we want to hear from you, dear audience. Who here actually influences the dry cow strategy on the farms? Okay, so we have a 30% who says they are decision takers. 20% is monitoring outcomes. That is interesting.
Indeed. And it's also interesting to say that the outcomes are mastitis, yield, and behavior.
So nice. That will lead to some interesting discussions.
Right.
Well,
but it's also deceiving to see that who's taking the decision. So it's the highest one is 30%, no? So is it the producer itself, or
normally the audience are veterinarians,
right?
Animal health consultants.
So if vets don't take the decision, who's taking it?
I hope the farmer is then.
Yeah.
While we're turning back on the question, maybe just a moment in turning back to the panel. You already discussed it briefly. If you have to choose rest, reset, or powering up for the dry period, what would you choose?
I grew up nurtured by Alex Bach concept. So I grew up as a vet, understanding that cows, dry cows, very early in my career, I understood that dry cows were really actively doing things. So for me, they are here to reset. Okay, so it's an active period, not really a rest period.
Yeah, I'd say that if you look at the life of the dairy cow, they're always building up. Since they're a calf, heifer, it's always metabolically a challenge to prepare the animal for the future. And the dry period is no exception. It's totally a reset and powering up. You're building the future.
Nice. Circling back to the first question or the first answer of the poll, what I would like to know is in the second poll, how do you define the success? We saw 20% is monitoring the outcome. What kind of outcome are you monitoring? What are your main indicators of a successful dry period? And while our audience is answering, I look again to my dear panel members. If we look at this at the three lenses, from the cow, the farmer, and the vet, and you need to choose one KPI, Leonard, what would be that KPI?
Coming from the mastitis world, in the beginning, my first KPI is the number of new infections during dry-off, because this is where you can assess the stress that are experiencing the cows that are moving to transition. So this is my main. So new infection during dry off is my main KPI as a coming from the mastitis. But it's a complex KPI because it's summarizing what happened during the nutritional phase of transition, but also hygiene and stress of the cows.
Okay. Alex, same question. Your number one KPI to evaluate the dry period, please.
Yeah, just one is difficult, but
Because it's you can give
no,
three.
that's okay. But and in the field, there is a lot of KPIs that are endpoints, outcomes. I rather use KPIs that are proactive. So Leo was saying mastitis. I agree with you fully. But then I go a little bit back forward. I say, well, what's causing mastitis? Maybe it's a lack of immunity. So why is there? Nutrition. So maybe a good KPI would be how much nutrients are the cows eating?
Dry matter intake.
Because if
like
I get that
one.
right, it's likely that I'm going to get right the mastitis, the health, and the other things. So we have to strive to get KPIs that are ahead of the game and stop counting ketosis or mastitis or disease, because that's the fire already burned. Let's go and look at the forest before it burns.
Nice. Let's see what our audience has to say. So no mastitis at freshening is definitely one of the major KPIs. High peak
They're
milk
in my
yield.
team.
Yeah,
They're in your team.
It's a good team.
No milk leakage. Yes, okay. Antibiotic-free dry off. Selective dry cow therapy. I think it was you who said, Leo, that we have still tremendous gains to be made. 50%, you said.
Yeah, 50% of all the antibiotics we use in dairy cows are used for dry off management. Yeah. So this is where we can do the most economical reduce on antibiotic usage in dry cows. So this is the key steps for the 10 next years in dairy production. If we want to be reasonable and reducing antibiotic resistance, this is where we can act very effectively.
And also get us out of the picture of antibiotic resistance and health for humans and all that. That's also important.
I would support also the point of view of Alex in the fact that we do a lot of blood testing, and the main stake, if we are getting close to the calving, is actually the NIFA mobilization close to calving, which is extremely linked to the dry matter intake. And what you see is that you can predict the disease after calving just by knowing how the cows is behaving before calving. So this is really a key period.
Interesting.
Thumbs up for one of the answers, though. There was one, I don't know how many guys, but there was a percentage mentioning cow comfort and, what is it? Cow comfort and behavior. Yeah. So 64%, that's a good one.
Yeah. Nice. So now that we have framed the challenge, because as you mentioned, we have different balls to keep in the air, how do we actually get there? Let's break it down. And we prepared this slide where we would like to go into three main topics. And that would be the dry period length, the dry off method, and the tools in use. So if we would go to length, dry period length, I find this an incredible, interesting discussion. And my question should be, or the feedback that we get from the field is, should we be basing this on lactation, days in milk, or risk profile? Leo, I'm going to give you the floor first.
I would say it depends on the size of the farm, of course, because it's difficult to handle this question without assessing the number of cow you dry at the same time. So if you have a 100 cow farm, I would advise only one length, and don't specify the length, because it's going to be too difficult to manage, and the risk for antibiotic contamination of the tank could be high. So the idea is they respect a global period of 50 days, which is enough for the modern dairy cows in small farms. When you go to big farms, then there would be some economical consequences that are really interesting to assess what are the costs of getting 10 days, 15 days, or 20 days more in milk. And this is, I think, more Alex's part.
Alex, please indulge us, because we also know that you're running a big trial.
Yeah, I'm hesitating to answer that question because I don't think we know the answer. So that's why we're running a very long and large trial. We're conducting a trial with 4,000 cows, 2,000 cows in 2 different farms for the entire duration of the year, so different seasons. And we're playing with different dry period lengths and different level of productions and dry off. Most of the literature it's just observational. So they look at the cows that have been dry for 50 days or 60, and then they say, yeah, these guys produce more, these guys produce less. But these cows were dried at 50 or 60 based on what? No, it's a little bit of genetics, a little bit of milk persistency. So there's a lot of confounding factors there. So we don't have a clear answer for that. So I like to play it safe. And I think because dry period is so important, I want to make sure that the cow has enough time to prepare for the next lactation. If I have to choose, I will go for a 58 dry period length. That would be my line of comfort. If I go a bit lower than that, I have to think about it.
Interesting, because we also did our research and we were looking at the drivers, the initial driver of the dry period length. And we found that the first publications actually date from the early 1800s, where two farmers, in my head, two farmers, were discussing whether it should be 2 weeks or 2 months. And actually, it took more than 140 years to come up with the right answer, and that was during World War II, because then we needed more milk, and milk was the main source for the soldiers. It was the Red Bull, and they started to frame the cows and the farmers as really the machine that is enabling us, and so we needed higher production. And then they came to the 60 days, which is close to your 58 days. And moving along to seeing how to increase production, they had different tools to do so. And then, of course, we wanted to optimize milk production during the lactation, and they went to look what is the minimal dry period capable. And this was then to be found 30 days in multiparous cows. And they were looking at what could be the drivers. And we talked about nutrition. We didn't talk about the hormonal changes, and we will leave that also at the side of the table, because in that particular scientific review, they said the main driver was mammary epithelial cell and mammary epithelial cell regeneration. And their consensus was, for multiparous cows, 40 days is enough, considering milk production in the next lactation. And for primiparous cows, they needed 60 days, or the effect on the next lactation could be detrimental, up to 20% less milk production. Now, my question for you is, being also active in the field, what do you do when a farmer says, yes, but my primiparous cows are so persistent, I only inseminate them long after 100 days in milk, and so their mammary epithelial cells, the growth of the animal, is already ensured because of the longer first lactation. How would you confront that?
I would be cautious. The two sides of the discussion, because we are looking at the calf now, okay? But there's also a calf in the cow, okay? And what we know is that 60% of the defenses of the animals come directly from the uterus phase. So the rest phase at the end of the lactation, so the dry-off period, is also beneficial to the calf itself. So if you go for an animal that is still growing, still producing, and experiencing the first pregnancy, and you don't leave some time enough, the risk is that it's not just about mammary gland, it's also about the global outcome of that first pregnancy. So I would give the primiparous cows still a long period to dry.
Perfect.
That's my statement.
Alex, any comments?
I fully concur.
Nice.
But that doesn't mean I'm going to have a long lactation. I want to have those primiparous cows bred or inseminated as fast as I can and as soon as I can.
Fully agree. Perfect.
I'm in a hurry to convert that first lactation animal into a second lactation animal that will produce more milk.
Just one slight technical note that just came to my attention for those who just entered or missed the first part. As I mentioned, the chat is open, so for any remarks or questions, please feel free to drop a note. Going further, I would like to investigate a little bit this nutrition part, this dry matter intake part that you mentioned, and we have one slide that was presented during a poster at the ADSA, which I liked very, very much. And actually what it was demonstrating was the impact of milk yield, milk yield and dry matter intake. And I would like to have your take on that, on this specific topic, and because actually what was interesting to see, or the way I read it, was the higher the milk yield, the better the metabolic profile of the animal at calving, and this had to do with higher dry matter intake.
You go, I go.
You go.
What is it first, the chicken or the egg? So why is those cows producing more milk? Is it because their metabolism is already working well, or they produce more milk because their metabolism was good? So I like that study, but it's an observational study. All they do is high milk production, low milk production. Of course, the high milk production cows eat more. The low milk production cows eat less. Both before dry off and in the under the dry period. And of course, then in the next lactation, the same thing happens. So I wonder if what we're seeing in that study, and we have to be aware of causality and association, is just an association between genetics, the genetic background of the animal, or their metabolic fitness. That, of course, the cows that produce more milk, they eat more, and they will do that all their life. They will eat more as a heifer, they will eat more as a dry cow, they will eat more as a first lactation cow, and as a fresh cow.
Agree. Another way to interpret that study, and that's the way I did it, was if you are going to reduce or play with the feed of the cow before dry off, she will eat less. And if she eats less, the reduction in dry matter intake is also continued into the dry period and even at calving. Again, a very concrete argument to say you should go for abrupt dry off regardless of milk production.
I fully agree with, I fully agree with what you said, totally. Yeah? That's not what is shown in that study. That's an association study. But of course, I'm of the opinion that you have to dry the cows abruptly. It's a mistake to try to mess up in nutrient intake of the animals. At the moment that you start restricting the intake of the cow or the nutrient consumption, just by feeding more straw or diluting the ration, you're creating stress because you're changing the animal from one pen to the other. You're not going to do that in the same pen. So you're already messing up with the immune system. And now the cow is still producing milk. She doesn't know that she's going to be dried. So she still wants to produce milk. She doesn't have the nutrients to do it. She's going to refer to her body reserves, and she's going to use that in the form of NIFA, and NIFA will compromise the immune system. At the moment that you need the most active immune system to fight potential mastitis due to dry off and buildup of milk in the mammary gland. So that study doesn't show it, but you could read it as you read it, right? If you decrease intake, you're going to mess up things. But that's not what that study is showing. But okay, what you said is I think is correct.
Perfect. Good to hear.
When it comes to modern dairy cows, you have to see them as a truck on the highway. So it means that it takes 6 days to stop the production of milk. But most people don't know how long it takes to the liver to stop being in a production state. So if you mess up with the nutrient intakes, the only thing that will happen is that you will break the cow. So the liver needs nutrients for at least 1 week after the dry off, because the metabolic regimen of the liver will be steady until it understands that the production stress has lowered. So you need to keep on the nutrients. All the methods that are diminishing or getting water out or making stress cows is really making mass in modern dairy cows. You can do this on cows that are producing 4,000 or 5,000 liters, but you cannot do this on cows that are more than 9,000 liters. It's impossible. It's dangerous even.
And it's interesting because I had the opportunity to learn from you both since multiple years. I mean, already more than a decade. And how come are we still making those same mistakes on farms?
I mean, they say that teaching is about repeating. So no, but that's the same in mastitis area. If you want to get people to modern concepts, it takes 10 to 15 years to make all the people understand the concepts. And we had no indicators. For example, we do a lot of blood sampling in our practice. And now we have the proof that the animals are still in production stage, even in far-off group. So it means that if you don't get the nutrients in the cow, you will break the cow. That's it. And you will create more NIFA, as Alex said. You create the initial stress, and then you keep the cows on stress.
So I like the fact that we already made a point on the length, on the dry matter intake, but indeed there is the stress, the immunity. So what other tools do we have to optimize the dry cow period? And here I looked again at what we have and what was developed. So again, since World War II, we have the use of antibiotics, thank God, and we use antibiotics a lot. I already heard you saying blanket cow therapy. We can reduce by 50% easily, pushing even more on selective dry cow therapy. I see internal teat sealants, external teat sealants, and in 2014, 2 amazing new products came onto the market, but unfortunately didn't find the right product market fit in Europe yet, probably because this also has to do with some management alterations. But now, looking at this, I imagine, what kind of tools are you using, are you recommending to achieving the goal? Leonard Theron, can I ask you from your opinion, if there is a tool missing that you would like to share with us? I'm happy to hear, happy to learn from you.
We are in the European market, in a market where the people is the shortage. Okay, so the work, the labor intensive is really the limiting factor in our production system. So it has to be, the drying off has to be easy to make understand to the people that are working with the cows, or the owners themselves, most of the time. So what we tend to do, and this is why I followed Alex from the beginning, is that we have to make it simple. So it has to be extremely simple. That's, for me, the first concept is about making it simple. So simple rules about nutrient intake, simple rules about how to dry off, and simple rules about antibiotic management. So for me, we need antibiotics. We will need antibiotics for treating cows that have been infected, but we can reduce from 50%. So the selective dry off is a concept that should be put in place in all the dairy farms now, because basically we are treating 60% of the cows that don't need antibiotics with antibiotics. The second concept for me is creating a solution tailor-made for one farm about how to bring the cow to the dry off and how to bring them to the lactation. Really simple. And when you go in countries like Spain, for example, they have process, they have rules, they have goals to make. And this is something that in Northern Europe, smaller farm, we need to put in place, because it's usually the owner, and usually the owners, they don't have process. So this is something that we need to bring to farm, is how to make it the process visible. Wow.
Does Home Expert already have a nice tool to bring to the farm?
That's a good one. I should make one.
Share with us. Please do. Alex? Considering tools to implement, to optimize the dry period.
I might be a bit biased, but my tools would be nutrients. I would ensure that the cow has enough starch so I can trigger an insulin release that will block my NIFA mobilization, and therefore my immune system will work. I will make sure that my cow has enough vitamin E and selenium, so my immune system works. And the cow consumes enough protein, so she can build the antibodies she needs to fight disease. So this, along with what you said, those are the tools that I would add at the list. And of course, management and simplicity. And I really like what you said about SOPs. We need standard operating procedures to dry cows. That's...
I may have a question at that stage, Alex. What do you think about the modern concept introducing, for example, fat in the ration to reduce the NEFA mobilization in preparation cows?
I like to see ruminants as ruminants, and I like the rumen to work. So when I feed fat, I'm not feeding my rumen. And I need that rumen to be active, right? That rumen will provide vitamins, especially soluble vitamins, many other things that are essential for the cow, essential amino acids, for instance. So I like my rumen to work. When I feed fats, I bypass the rumen. I don't feed my microbes. And I don't need to go to fat, because the energy level that these guys need is not very high. I can cover it very easily with starch. So just a little bit of corn or wheat or barley will do the job. I'll keep my microbes happy, and I'll keep my cow health.
Perfect. So if I understand it well, after the webinar, we will be sure to send you a Room Expert protocol and the ideal diet made by Alex Bach to tweak the optimal dry period length. So in summary, We are at 40 between 60 days multiparis, primiparis cows. We are at an abrupt dry-off, and the tool does not replace the fool. We have to keep it simple. So imagine that there was a clean decision point to make a dry-off period possible. No slow fade, no guesswork, just a single moment like pressing stop on a stopwatch. That is the idea behind StopLac, the feed additive that is used today already on more than 1,600 farms, and already more than 30,000 cows have been dried off with this product. And I would like to explain how this works. So we were able to reduce milk yield with 56%. Of course, this is measured in cows in lactation. We explained that by doing this, we can facilitate abrupt dry-off regardless of the milk yield of the dairy cow. As a feed additive, it has no withdrawal time, no antibiotic action. This, of course, leads to less engorgement and an improved animal welfare. And we have the luck today that the researcher that demonstrated the reduced risk of metabolic issues around calving is here today with us to explain a little bit more in detail the research that has been done. Showing the research that we have done, we would like to explain in the next slide how it works. So the mode of action is actually an allium derivative that is altering the rumen microbiome, and this leads to a reduction in volatile fatty acid production. We also have rosemary and other immune modulation stress relief products in. And to give you an idea on how that looks like, we are happy to share with you a short video that was shared by us to one of our farmers in the US who recently double tested whether or not what we are saying is true. And I would like to share that video with you on how animal welfare looks like to a farmer after dry-off.
So these are the ones we dried off yesterday. All these 32 cows. And then that's one. The one next door is our tubes. They're all balding. Look at these cows, they're not balding at all. Tubes next door.
So peace and quiet, that's what we like. That's what the cow likes. Bringing back to two pieces more of research that I would like to share with you. The initial research coming from 2021, coming out of Utrecht University. It was them who demonstrated first the reduction in milk production. And what I like to show here is that, of course, if you continue milking the cow, the milk production was back at par. We also did a test with different dry-off facilitators on the market available, just to see if the mode of action of reducing milk yield was the same. And so far, we did not find yet any other product with the same effect. But now, enough talk. I would like to introduce the work that has been done by the group Room Expert, and here to explain the Chief Technical Officer, Leonard. Leonard, we have a few slides. You don't have to follow the slides, but please explain us
I know them.
what you did, why you did it, and if you could give us some background on the biomarkers that you were able to demonstrate.
So the idea was to compare two groups of cows using StopLac and a placebo control in a blind farm, and we took blood samples along the dry-off period and after the calving. We followed the production after the calving period. We randomized, of course, the cows before, and we took some milk sample during the dry-off. Okay, so it's a particular sampling because we don't usually take samples during the dry-off period, of course. So we had to make it in a very clean way so that you don't provoke infections. So the key points was that in the beginning, we were not at all testing the drying off effect because it was already confirmed by previous studies. We were just looking at how cows behave on the metabolic point of view with the StopLac or no StopLac. What we found out is that before calving, first at dry off, okay, so we found out that the cows that received the bolus had a quick acidification of the milk with a fast reduction of lactose and fat. which means that the tissue is resorbing the production faster than in the control group. So it means that already the effect of the StopLac is basically on how fast the mammary gland is resuming to no production. So that's really interesting because this is how macrophage clean the lactoserum, and basically you keep only the protein level. So you don't have more fat and you have less lactose. And this is how you can reduce. We were also concerned about, is StopLac, okay for cows? Do we get any modification of the blood formula and stuff? And we get nothing. So basically, there was no difference between the two cows in terms of safety, in terms of health of the cows, etc. What was really interesting is close to calving, the cows that received the treatment were actually showing a different pattern of preparation of the calving. So they get less NEFA mobilization than the control group. And we get after calving also more calcium and phosphor in the blood of the cows after calving. So basically it's a small study, it was a pilot study, but basically what we understand is that the StopLac administration at dry off is providing condition, at least for a small set of cows, and that needs to be confirmed in a large group, that probably affect a little bit or program a little bit the preparation of the calving in these cows. So this is what we can say at that point.
Interesting. Of course, I have thoroughly read your study. Could you explain something about, because you already mentioned in the blood, the safety of the product was confirmed, but as I mentioned, we're an oral feed additive. We're impacting the rumen microbiome. At least we have the Queen's University, a PhD ongoing. The phase 1 is just concluded. Phase 2 is now in vitro analysis of applying the StopLac in a anaerobe environment where we can follow up on volatile fatty acid production, where we can do a 16R microbiome study, sequencing study. But how do you assess rumen health? And was this looked at?
That's a good one. Well, there's many ways to assess rumen health, and there is, as the first questions, there is no one answer to that. But what we do in RumExpert, we monitor the B12 vitamin, which is, as Alex said before, it's the results of many interactions. So what we are looking at is just from a distance, how well the flora is producing these soluble vitamins, okay? What was interesting is that we get healthier liver value in the treated group from the control group. So it means that the NEFA mobilization is also preventing mild effect, even milder effect on the liver. And it's probably making the volatile fatty acids from the liver more interesting for the cow. But if it's the case, and still it's a small group, so we need to dig up, but we had more vitamin B12 in the treated group than in the control group. So it means that the flora was behaving better with the same ration. So the micronutrients effect that we have in these cows is still to be investigated, okay? It's only a small pilot study. But it was really interesting to see how well an additive that you give 50 to 60 days before looking at the effect was affecting the cows. So clearly, the mechanism that is underlying, we don't have clue yet, but the result is interesting and needs to be confirmed in large population.
And just to confirm also to the members of AHV, the phase 2 in the larger study is ongoing?
Just begun, yeah.
Nice, yeah. Great. Alex, I know we send you the materials. Now you've heard from Leo some of these results. What is your take on it? If you hear the potential, if it does what it does, if it's confirmed in a large scale study, what would be the potential effect of this kind of tool for you?
Well, if it does what Leo is saying it does, and the data that you've shown is solid, I think it's a dual. I think it's, before we're debating about the reluctance to change that producers have and how difficult it is to implement new technologies, right? Many of the things that producers do for drying off cows is because they're afraid of drying a cow with 40 kilos of milk or 45 kilos of milk. So a tool like this will really take that fear out and will make the life much easier for producers to say, I'm going to dry the cow on Tuesdays because that's where I dry them, and I'm not going to do anything else and just give the tablets and move on. That's fantastic. Okay. I think that's one thing. The other thing is that it has potential to improve the health and the long-term productivity of the animals, because the cows will be dry abruptly on a single diet, and it will facilitate milk production in the future.
Perfect. Based on these results, what would you like to know, or would you like to investigate before, for instance, implementing this on a farm or advising this on a farm? What are for you some more key aspects that you would like to see or know?
Well, I'm a scientist by training, right? So I'm always curious. I like to ask the critical question. And when I look at the data critically, I see that we have a product that reduces intake but fosters rumen growth. No, the bacteria in the rumen seem to work. To me, that's a match. And there is something that intrigues me a bit. How is this happening? No, and at the end, I will also like to look behind the rumen and see why milk production is going down. So to exactly know the mode of action, that would be my scientific question, which may or may not matter for the field, but from my perspective, it matters.
Well, I can assure you there are people much smarter than me thoroughly investigating this at the moment, and we will be happy to share also with our audience the results as soon as these are published. Moreover, we are even looking forward to publishing or presenting all these results at the next Bioethic Congress, and hopefully in Istanbul. Giving this new tool, giving the discussion that we had also on the push for selective dry cow therapy, because we might forget that it's actually already obliged for 2-3 years, I would like to return again to our audience and ask them the question, how do you see the selective dry cow therapy? Yes, this question. So what would convince your farmer to adopt a selective dry cow therapy? It's nice to see the results coming in like that. So we had a clear indicator for you need research data. There needs to be an animal welfare benefit and reduced labor. I think that was exactly the simple aspects that you said, and it satisfies me a lot to see that the below number is very low, don't you think?
Yeah.
I hope it's representing the actual situation.
I wonder if they're answering by themselves or for the farmers. I don't know if the farmer needs the science, or is them that need the science to convince the farmer. You know what I mean?
That's an ongoing process.
Well, that would actually bring us to the next question, but I will already ask it to you, our panelists, because we see that the results remain the same. But I'll also ask the audience, what would a farmer need to optimize a dry cow protocol?
That's a question for us.
And for the audience.
Optimize. Well, if we involve selective dry cow therapy, which I think you have to, you need data, right? Because one thing is say, you have to do selective dry cow therapy, but now tell me how, and what do I have to look? How do I decide if the cow needs antibiotic or not? Do I decide it on a milk test that was done 30 days ago? What happens to the mastitis that occurred 7 days ago? Do I do it in level of milk production? Do I do it in the level of decay of milk production? So we need to come up with a very simplified method or an app or a system that tells the producer which cows need to be dried and which cows do not. So that's something that I think we need to come up with from the vet side or from the industry. That's probably one of the reasons why selective dry cow therapy is still hesitating. I think everybody understands that it has to be done. How to do it is not that straightforward. Okay.
Leo is investigating the answers, seeing something interesting.
No, I was thinking that we need to see, it's a weird answer that we'll give, but we need to see ourselves more as European. Why? Because we have the examples. Okay, so the Netherlands, they took off 10 years ago, and they already reduced 60% of the antibiotics, or even more, in dairy cows. So this is a major success. This is a major example. We cannot imagine more data than the one that comes from the Netherlands. So the question is, why cannot we just jump in and follow the example? And it's exactly the same situation with the blue tongue infection around Europe. We learn from each other, but we need that one is taking the lead. So now that we have the example, I think that in modern dairy production, selective dry-off, when you read the samples, we just need to bring the concept to the farmer. And the only one that is responsible for that, for me, is the veterinarian. Because no one else than the veterinarian knows how to do it. Probably the biggest problem is that they don't see alternatives. And this is what's missing on the market. We need some tools to be able to dry the cows in good condition without antibiotics. So just moving out the antibiotics is not enough as a concept. Then, having some advice, concepts, or tools to provide to the farmer. So we need a new tool to provide to the farmer to frame the dry-off.
Okay. We're almost at the end. But before I'm going to summarize, I am going to ask the question, because you have the experience in the field, you have the experience, you have the science. But if you would have your own cows, your own farms, yes? And because this is also a remark that we get, the selective dry cow treatment protocol is very cluttering. Keep it simple. How would you decide? What cow deserves it? And combining everything. I will not take you up on that answer, but I will ask it.
So I'm biased because we have an app that is providing the answer on daily basis.
Dear audience, will be shared with you.
But this is based on Belgian data for now. So we are only providing this to Belgian vets, advisors, and farmers. But basically, somatic cell count, production level, and then easiness of drying off. Okay, so we need to get to 20 liters max. We need to select the cows that are over 100,000 cells at dry off or below to make a difference, selective or not. And then we need to make it written. So it has to be written somewhere in the parlor, in the dairy facilities. It needs to be written. And the nutrients. So how we feed the cows at far off. Okay, so this is the 4 main components: written statements, nutrients, somatic cell count, and getting close to 20 liters.
Okay.
I'm also biased. I also have an app. It's called Algo Milk. And the approach we've taken is we use artificial intelligence for it. So what we do is we know the lactation curve of every cow. We know the parity of every cow. We know the weather, the season, and we also have the historical data. We also know what happens when there is too many cows in the pen that we dry the cows, which it happens to be crowded around October, November, December, or even a little bit before. And then it goes out in summer because there is less calvings. So with artificial intelligence, you actually can predict, because maybe in summertime I will dry a cow with 150,000 somatic cell counts, but in wintertime I will not, because there is more cows in my pen. So with artificial intelligence, you can combine all these inputs and then make a decision. We also look at how many mastitis cases there were in that lactation, in the previous lactation for every animal, level of production, as you said, many other things. So, yeah, artificial intelligence will be my answer.
Nice. That's always a good answer.
And of course, it will be a sheet with a list of cows that get treated. That's the end result that you have to give to the producer.
Nice. Well, from my point of view, AHV being, we don't have an app, but we do have proactive protocols. And we actually have a PhD that's working on improving selective dry cow therapy, not necessarily with StopLac, with other products that were already on the market. We presented it, even this materials at NMC. And interestingly enough, what came out of that study, it's still waiting for publication, should be there in a few months, was that the trial setup setup, how we did it, was that we were able to dry off cows regardless of their somatic cell count in a selective way, without having any negative impact on somatic cell count in the next lactation, milk yield or milk quality, and we saw even a very positive effect in the number of new infections. Again, was maybe a small study of 5 farms, 2 years, so quite some nice cows.
Yeah.
But we're very proud of that one, and I think we don't emphasize that enough. To come back on, yes, there are tools available, there is new science available, and if we would then summarize what is the ideal method of dry off, I think we are agreeing on the fact that it's 40 to 60 days multiparis, primiparis, or
60 days.
60 days to keep it simple.
Yeah.
We need to emphasize abrupt dry off. And there are new tools in the market that we have to familiarize ourselves. And one of these tools is the sponsor of this evening, is StopLac, a new dry-off facilitator that improves the management, because we can keep it simple, the animal welfare, and even the metabolic health at calving. So we do see early trials that show promising results. And as mentioned, we will continue validating these results. And we hope to see the audience back at the Beattering Congress, where we will happily demonstrate the continuation of this product. This will bring us now to the Q&A session, and I see a first question from David. What kind of return on investment does StopLac have compared to conventional methods of drying off cows? Conventional methods is quite open. Before we discuss in the nitty-gritty of this discussion, can I ask just a rough calculation? How would you position this product?
That's a good one. But if it delivers on large scale effect, yes, on the NIFA balance, the potential effect is in hundreds of euro, because it has consequences up to. So on the return of investment, I mean, the consequences of negative energy balance excess in the near calving and disbalance in the macro elements, so calcium, phosphor, magnesium, you can easily go up to 300, 400 euro of losses if you count all the potential disease, metritis, mastitis, and ketosis themselves. So, yeah. If it deliver that amount of effect, I would the return on investment for me is close to several hundreds of euro.
Alex, you're going to say that you have an app for that.
No. Well, we have an app that estimates the real cost of every disease. But I have nothing to add to Leo's. It's absolutely correct. If the product does what you say it does, it has a huge potential. It will help people not to do strange things and dry off. That will improve the metabolic status of the cow, and that has very good consequences after calving. Less metritis, less ketosis, more milk production, better reproduction.
Okay. Question that we have also from the field, just to pick on that. And this was a live case situation. So when we presented this product on dairy farms, they were so convinced by the idea, and maybe by previous good experience of similar products, that they stopped abruptly their conventional method and switched over to only StopLac. And we had the discussion as well, the onset of some mastitis cases mid dry off. How would you estimate the severeness of a mastitis case in the midst of dry off? Is this really something we need to concern about?
Well, to be honest, we when we checked because we took cows in cells, infected or non-infected, in our trial, just to make the group evens, and we didn't see any positive or negative effect on the presence or absence of an infection. So the product by itself doesn't has any consequences, direct consequences on, for us at least, or visible on the modification of the dynamics of the udder health.
Okay.
But again, it needs large number of cows to assess this. You need at least 350 cows minimum to do such a trial. So this is why the new trial is at least 400 cows. But the severity of infection during the dry-off are always quite high for different reasons. Because the animals should be on antibiotics and they didn't receive it, or you contaminated the udder in a moment where you don't milk the cows anymore. So it's always a pain, always a pain. And I'm not talking about subclinical infections and new infections that are happening close to the calving. I'm talking about, the Pseudomonas infections, Klebsiella infections at dry-off, or yeast mastitis at dry-off. And these are always severe. So the consequences of a mastitis at dry-off is always a mess, always a mess. But for me, it's just the consequences of a bad management of dry-off. That's it.
At the moment of dry-off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Which would include poor immune response of the animal if the cow is inadequately fed.
Yeah.
Which is,
And you see this when you put cows on no water, for example.
Right.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
But people are still doing this in some condition. They are putting cows outside, with no water for half a day or 1 day or 2 days sometimes. Then you're drying off the rumen and you're really creating inflammatory situation. So, yeah.
and small farms are doing that with a very small number of cows, sometimes just 1 or 2 cows. And cows hate that. They're gregarious animals. They want to be together. So you just move 1 cow into a pen by herself, you're killing that animal. The immune system goes like,
yeah. And this is interesting also when you see these modern concepts. For example, in calf rearing, we now have the interest into both group calving. And what we see is that they are enhancing their nutritional behavior. And this is something that we tend to forget about dry cows, as Alex said, that they are really gregarious animals, so they need to be in group. And when you're separating them, you're creating some stress already.
Perfect. Based again on this nutrition, question from Juan, how does maintaining a TMR until dry-off enhance the effectiveness of StopLac, and what could be the consequences of deviating from this protocol, abrupt versus gradual via feed restriction? I guess we've thoroughly discussed this. The biggest impact would be?
well, if you're reducing intake in purpose, right? Because you're changing the TMR and going to a dry-off diet, if you wish, and on top of that, you put a StopLac, you may really cause a problem, right? You don't want to do that. You don't need to do that, actually. So I would not advise to do that.
Okay. Anything to add?
No, same.
Compared to other abrupt dry-off methods without StopLac, how does the use of StopLac impact cow welfare and udder health? And what is the evidence to support this difference? So this means we're drying off cows abruptly, with and without. And can we measure the impact on cow welfare and udder health? Or demonstrate?
Yeah. Measuring welfare, I find it very, very difficult. It's difficult.
I had one movie, I was so proud of it, I put it in the presentation.
Right. Yeah.
But otherwise...
Exactly. The mooing is very illustrative.
Could you see something on rumination time?
Rumination time will be very correlated to intake. So the cows that eat the most are the ones that ruminate the most. So if the rumination time goes down, it's because the cows are eating less. Does that make the animal with less welfare? I don't know. Sometimes I eat less. Sometimes I eat more.
On the other hand, we have a huge number of farms that shared with us their rumination data from SmikeStack or Sensor. And what we did see with cows that were dried off with StopLac, it was at the moment of dry-off, within the 6 to 12 hours, the decrease in rumination time was lower. So we went lower, but after 6 to 12 hours, it went up again, and it was higher compared to the control cows on the same farm. Would that be an indicator, or would you say, no, this has to do more, this is more influenced by feeding than by using a product based on the...
Well, I mean, I like cows to ruminate, so that's an indication that they eat more. So the more a cow eats, the better things will go.
Okay.
So whether that's more welfare or not is debatable, but for sure it's a good situation to have a cow that eats more and ruminates more.
And if you go to microbiological level, the clinical biochemistry of these cows in the trial, we were testing haptoglobin, for example, so early inflammatory markers, LPB, which is a lipopolysaccharide binding protein, which is a sign of disbalance from the feed. And what we see is that there was no consequences of the StopLac use on haptoglobin, so inflammation was nearly non-affected by that. But what was interesting is that we get lower LPB response close to the calving. So it could mean that the nutritional stress imposed to the cows by transition is lower in the cows that receive the treatment. Again, it needs to be enhanced in larger group. But if we frame, so welfare is a difficult discussion. I fully agree with Alex, because nowadays, every sensor that we get is discussing about welfare or not. In fact, we're just looking at bias of these sensors. So if you look from a blood point of view, there was no impact of the use of StopLac. In our trial, not at all, nothing, not detectable. But the modification of the biology of the drying off in the cistern, so in the cistern on milk, was really different. So we believe that there's an effect there, probably on the macrophage activity or the stop of the production in the acinis. But for the rest, we didn't see anything, nor in the leukocytes, nor in the early inflammatory marker, nothing.
Okay. And then coming back, and this is also a question, we explained some benefits. I don't know if we mentioned it in detail, but we also saw lower CPK values in the StopLac cows. We saw lower NIFAs, higher cortisol. So these metabolic markers, and this is again the chicken or the egg story. If you say lower inflammatory markers, does this mean that we might, to be confirmed on a large scale study, improve liver health and therefore have better blood results because of more eating during the dry periods? Would that be the hypothesis, then the running hypothesis to go for?
If you get close to Alex Bach work of the last 20 years, sorry, I'm paraphrasing, but the cows actually produce their own substance as antibiotics. For example, short-chain fatty acids, they are powerful medicines. If you inject them into a sick udder, an inflamed udder, you will reduce inflammation. So it means that the cows, naturally, in their normal behavior, they produce their own substance to reduce inflammation. And this is short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids are directly, in our system, linked to the ruminal health. What we believe is that if you enhance the production of short-chain fatty acids by any means, maintaining the production, maintaining the dry matter intake, having a good balance in nutrients, you will enhance the natural anti-inflammatory drugs from the cow. So this is what we believe, that what we've seen in the trial is that probably the first reason why the cows were behaving different in the blood was that they had lower mobilization. Why? Because the ruminal health was higher. That's what we think. Okay. And the small or the tiny mechanism that are underlying needs to be explained. I think that's going to be the best interesting thing about the StopLac product is how we are changing the flora. Why? And then probably measure methane, etc. But what we've seen is lower muscle mobilization pre-calving, so it means higher protein level, lower fat mobilization, so it means also less stress on the fat. So the only way to ensure that is that you have enough fatty acids, short-chain fatty acids specifically.
Perfect. Alex, anything to add?
Nothing to add. That's wonderful.
Then we will round up. I thank you tremendously for joining us. And a special thanks to Alex and Leo, to all of your insights. A follow-up email will be sent to you. It will include the summary of the slides, the replay link of the webinar, and links to the different studies that we discussed during this session. I would warmly invite you to keep the conversation going. If you have any questions about StopLac solution, or any of the other AHV solutions, please reach out to us. We are happy to inform, openly discuss, and especially let's dry off better. Thank you so much
for joining us. And thank you for having us.